Whoa, where are you going? Heading out for a bit. But we're recording. You need to be here. The script's on the desk and the notes are on the computer. You two can handle the PubSec video yourselves. It's a short one. There are only 2 characters to talk about. That doesn't change the fact that you're the star of the show. You can't just leave it to your sidekicks. I take offense to that. And aren't we all the same person? There aren't any sidekicks or sideshows here, New. We're your backup. Well, at least for today, you're hosts. I trust you to do just as well as you always do. This is a terrible idea. We have a good thing going, and we just started getting into a flow. This is the time for consistency, not change. Nothing's changing, man. Look, if you want to keep playing support, you're free to. I don't mind taking the lead with this. I mind. The point of these videos is to educate and present points from an interesting perspective. These are analyses, after all, and they won't be very good ones if we don't have substance and structure. Sure, but it's more entertaining if we're nice and loose with it, you know? The system we have is rigid, and for the sake of our audience and maintaining the education and entertainment we've sworn ourselves to, we have to stick to it. What does it tell them if we can't be relied on to make consistent, high-quality work? How are we going to start doing even better without taking matters into our own hands? The system is there as a guideline for us to follow, and what matters is that we enforce the ideas the system is there to protect, not that we always stick to the rules we set to keep ourselves in line. See, that was pretty good. I'm New. I'm Moo, and this is a little something about alignment, and what public security has to say about rules. It's kinda messed up that the one time the show's ours to run, we only get to talk about 2 characters. And as far as the themes of the chapter and the lesson we're trying to teach is concerned, we really only need to talk about Officer Zhu. You're crazy. But kinda right. Mission Unthinkable is definitely mostly about Zhu and her becoming an officer that the citizens of New Eridu can actually look up to, but she doesn't become that officer without Qingyi's guidance. Go on? No, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start from the beginning in character introductions. Our first interaction with public security is when Belle almost gets hit by a car. She gets tackled out of the way and into safety by Officer Zhu, while Officer Qingyi goes the extra mile and completely totals said car. We'll come back to this. What's important to their characters is how they responded, but the fact that they responded at all is more crucial to our impressions of them. It shows us that they're reliable and willing to put themselves in harm's way for citizens, for us, the player, and that action immediately paints them in a positive light. And that light is important, because if the whole being a gorgeous, assertive, and remarkably distinct character in a gacha game who suddenly barged into our lives didn't make it obvious, we're going to be focusing on her for a while. Do any of those sentiments extend to Qingyi? Her goblin sidekick? None of them. But that creates multiple points of contrast that make Zhu even more outstanding. The 2 are partners, so while Zhu is the one who stands out by nature of proximity, being the one tackling Belle out of the way, by design with those striking orange highlights, mature build, did I mention she's gorgeous? And by precedence, being the one Belle and the players see first once she opens her eyes, and the one to get those sweet first words of, "Are you alright?" She's the first to act and the first to speak up, so she puts herself on center stage while Qingyi waits her turn. That first impression is incredibly important, considering how quickly the chapter's central conflict chugs onto scene. You want us to be able to root for Zhu as soon as possible, and the best way to do that is to show us how she plays ball, and show us why the antagonist really needs to be benched. It's good to be vigilant as a public security officer, but, he says. There's no but here. If there's a but to a statement that should be as rock solid as police have to do their jobs, I'd better be able to see that shit from the front. And the election is just around the corner is about as flat of an argument as you can get. Inspector Bringer is this chapter's indirect antagonist, and I hate him, and serves the chapter as a negative foil to Zhu in her development as an agent of the law. He fills that role while doubling as Zhu idol, mentor, and a gleaming example of how previously good people can get their morals corrupted by vices. It's a good setup, and my only real complaint with it is that we're told how good of an officer Bringer used to be instead of shown. We're given the necessary sauce for it to be compelling, but we only know Bringer as a stuck-up, cloud-obsessed punk, so it's kinda hard to sympathize with the part of Zhu struggle, where she wants to stop looking up to him. A flashback of Zhu being rescued would have been killer. She's a good officer, end of argument, but to call Zhu a bit of a stickler might be an understatement. She's all about doing things by the book, following protocol, stopping Qingyi whenever she starts doing anything that could lead to them getting in trouble, and she's pretty good about going through those motions. Policing is demanding, and to ensure she does the best work she can, Zhu shuts the feelings down and pulls out the notepad, taking notes and getting accounts. She can't be certain one way or another if Give Change is actually the culprit in the duck-based jailbreak, and can't let Tin Master's assurance that he's a good Bangbu influence her unbiased hammer of judgment. But he's such a good boy, though. There's no way this rotund fella has the vertical to open the door of the truck. Doesn't change the fact that Zhu on the clock. Ducks flew out, are missing, it's a big deal, and we don't know who's responsible. Give Change gives his account, and the bickering gets underway. But whether it's Gale trying to gaslight her with theatrics, shut up, Gale. With him insisting that they find a way to link Give Change to the crime, or Tin Master assuring her that there's no way he's the culprit, and that they have to prove his innocence. Zhu keeps her thoughts in her notes. Their concerns are valid, but they're clutter. The facts of the case and keeping the peace are the first things in her order of operations. Because as officers, she and Qingyi are inclined to do good, but they have to remain neutral. They have to stick to the facts and focus on their own function as symbols of the law and representatives of public security. That's how Zhu Yuan sees it, at least, and she goes about the entire caper from the perspective of being the law. Lawful neutral individuals act in accordance with law, tradition, and personal codes. And she's not lawful good because morality stays out of her decisions as a cop. Criminals get punished, and until the conflict is resolved, feelings stay out of it. Zhu does want the right thing to be done, and believes and practices a train of thought where the best way for her to do good in the end is to be neutral and open-minded in the present. When discourse starts up, she's ready with a notepad in hand, an impartial flatness to her tone. And when it's done, she's kind enough to help the back and forth meet an agreement. She helps the tension disperse like a mediator should, and more importantly, once a way to resolve the conflict shows itself, she's willing to stick around and help reach it. She says it so she can stay on hand in case of further conflict, and that it'd take too long to hand it off to junior officers, but I don't think it's unreasonable to think that unless the rules said she couldn't, Zhu Yuan would stick around to help regardless. The law gives her an excuse to do the right thing. It and her training make convenient cases for her to do what presumably makes sense in her heart. The sweet and kind of bashful face has to hide away when it's time to be a cop, but she is more than just a cog in the machine. She wants to do good. Good that's still within the confines of the law and that training, but good nonetheless. It's little things like how she poses the threat instead of shooting first, and how she can completely stop a chase to make sure Qingyi is safe, but the moment they catch up with Carlo, the mask goes back on, she's a cop again, and the quickest way for them all to get out of the hollow is for her to take notes, take names, read rights, and get walking. She's pragmatic, but that pragmatism's a good thing, because it fuels a sense of reliability whenever the mask comes up, while still making sure she stays the sweet, approachable, drop-dead adorable officer that we're supposed to be endeared to by this whole ordeal. The entire Duck incident is a proving ground for her to demonstrate what a good PubSec officer is and why she's one of them. Reliability and approachability. I'd argue that those are the most important qualities for any officer of the law to have. We should trust them to get the job done, to ease our minds, and we should not only not have any reservations about approaching them, we should be encouraged to. A standout officer like Zhu Yuan is the perfect kind of character to put a cocktail of likability and lawfulness on full display, and Mission Unthinkable is the perfect stage for it. Investigator Bringer isn't likable, and instead of using the law as a lens to solve problems, he'd rather let the problems be because to him, the law is a pedestal for him to lift himself up on. He's a stand-in for political corruption and how officers shouldn't prioritize their image over their function in society, their duty to the citizens they serve, and doing the right thing. Bringer would let an orphanage burn down if it meant he could look good for his bosses. There's a big thesis brushed throughout the chapter, a few of them actually, but the biggest is that failure to act when action is needed shows a lack of courage. This is a lesson Qingyi doesn't have to learn. In fact, it's when she teaches Zhu Yuan as she decides to abandon her post and head out to secure the evidence convoy once they learned that it was at risk. After some back and forth and some concerns for their job in the seminar she was supposed to present in, Zhu Yuan resigns herself to doing the right thing and pursuing the greater good without concern for the consequences, and in turn she infects Bellwise with that lesson herself. When Zhu and Qingyi are cornered, the two of them put their worries of being captured, arrested, and having their lives uprooted aside to help the officers out of their pinch. It's all moral logic. This is the right thing to do, so we do it. Bringer stays at the lecture with the press, and the two heroes get to be exactly that, while the hero who lost his luster gets to take questions and people please. Law is impartial, but it's also imperfect. If she stuck to policy, she'd never have gone into the hollow after the caravan, citing said policy and how they could have action taken against them, or how she has people expecting her to take questions at the seminar, but a bit of chaos gets her through the door. Some beliefs floating up to surface in her brain at the right time, a revelation and a resolution. Sometimes you have to break the rules to do the right thing. Securing the evidence of that crazy monster is more important than any consequences, and she is going to do the right thing by putting herself in danger to secure it, even if it's the last thing she ever does as an officer of the law. Qingyi's a good influence on her. You need a bit of bite and impulse to soften up those pragmatic edges. I'm the one with edges? I didn't say that. I said intelligence tastes best with the side of wisdom, that you can have the playbook memorized and know how to execute every maneuver on its sheets, but you need foresight to improve, and the insight to know when it's time to do something saucier. Good influence she may be, but Qingyi's a little freak. For every rule and policy Zhu Yuan spouts off, Qingyi's got a hunch and a poem, and most of the time they don't make sense to anyone but her. Girl, why are you licking random shit? This is a crime scene! If Zhu Yuan is law, Qingyi is definitely chaos. And I will champion chaos as a good thing until the end of time. Let's look at how it manifests in Zhu Yuan's little helper, in ways besides her randomly tasting heavily ether-corrupted evidence. Chaos is investigating the crime scene yourself when your orders are just to secure it. It's constantly sassing your superiors and berating your captain's bad behavior. And it's pelting the dude you're chasing down with a random canister when you're supposed to call it out before applying force. She kinda did. That wasn't a "we're about to hit you" shout, that was a "you're about to get hit" shout. That's not the same. Qingyi is a lot more vital than Zhu Yuan is, and lacks the mask that sets Cop Yuan apart from Person Yuan. She's always a snide and cryptic little shit who doesn't know the definition of personal space. She always speaks her mind, she always goes off on stints, and she always keeps that sharp tongue about her. So even though she's a blatant and eager participant in police brutality, Qingyi is still remarkably good thanks to the flexibility she flaunts. She's also just really nonchalant about everything. That's experience. That's chaos. That's a sign of a person who's seen so much shit that nothing surprises them anymore. and no matter what happens, they can roll with the punch. Yes, her weird feeling about Eos is only a hunch, and her buddy cop breaks her up, but she was right. When news about all their hard work going up in smoke and the conspiracy they're battling slipping through their fingers becomes an actual threat, no hesitation, no backtracking. Ching-Yi goes into a raider-filled hollow to keep things going to plan, and she intends on going alone. That incredible amount of experience, coupled with her artificial body and general pragmatism, also makes her the first to suggest sacrificing herself once things start going south. And when Bellwise swoop in to save the day, she's the first to see the writing on the walls and accept their help once she feels like she can trust them. That's the key word, though. It's feeling. Zhu Yuan follows along once they get the green light to make a run for it, and follows Phaethon's lead through the entire daring escape, but probably only because Ching-Yi was vocally on board and willing to take all of the help they could get, so long as it helped them do their good. For the chaotic, the result they want is all that matters, and the means they go about getting it doesn't quite as much. It doesn't mean that they're completely unable to act within the law, and sure, the only time we see Ching-Yi reference the rules of public security is for her own convenience, Phaethon's, and the convenience of Zhu Yuan, who may still be on the fence about accepting help from a proxy to lock this conspiracy down. But she's still an officer and aligns herself with good and the common interest of the people. It's through Ching-Yi that we get the most important messages of the chapter. The first, as mentioned before, is that failure to act when action is needed shows a lack of courage. Now, I could be a prick and use Zhu Yuan holding her fire instead of legging the guy spamming EMPs while Ching-Yi shot put him in the shoulder with no questions asked as the example here, but that'd be stupid. This is not a lesson either she or Zhu Yuan need to learn. Our first encounter with them is them jumping in front of a car to save the player character after all, and they do it in their own way. Zhu Yuan protects the citizen first and foremost, while Ching-Yi disables the problem. The former is how an officer's priorities are supposed to be set, and the latter got the same result of keeping everyone safe, but with just a little bit more property damage. You'd know a little something about that, wouldn't you? Cram it. The struggle revolving the message isn't them becoming willing to put their necks out. It's Zhu Yuan realizing that sometimes action needs to be taken outside of the law if she's really going to serve the people and the idea of good the law is there to protect. The second is that rules aren't perfect. The law demanding the indiscriminate arresting of proxies doesn't sit well with Ching-Yi, which the admittance of that naturally puts the respectable officer in the hot seat with her captain a bit, but her reason is an internalized idea of fairness, and knowing that the law doesn't always allow for that. Valuing your own ideology over the law is as chaotic can be, because without lines of some kind, it's not chaos, it's anarchy. And while Zhu maybe doesn't completely adopt that mentality, it rubs off on her and on us. The law isn't flexible, but the result of good almost always matters more than sticking to the lawful method. Again, if Zhu Yuan hadn't given into a bit of chaos, she'd have never come out into the hollow with Ching-Yi in the first place, and the evil masterminds would have won. And lastly is that worshipping an undeserving deity is sycophancy. These are words from a girl without a shred of worship in her heart. Law enforcement has no place for it. They are there to do good, without concern for their images or the opinions of their idols, and that's the lesson she teaches Zhu Yuan. It's the lesson pushed onto us, that people can change for the worse or can use the system society runs on as a platform, and if they do, we are doing harm to ourselves by insisting that they can change for the better again. Investigator Bosson, Bringer, is the antithesis. He's the undeserving deity. He's the hero who saved Zhu Yuan from an incident in the Hollow and inspired her to become an officer in the first place. Investigator Baxter, Bringer, over an unknown span of time, got corrupted by politics and has planted a seed of mistrust of public security into the minds of the 6th Street residents. The seed Zhu Yuan helps dig back up. Investigator Bumass, I'm gonna let you have that one, is the bad officer we're supposed to compare the good officers to. He's the bar that got lower and lower as the years went on, but the one Zhu Yuan kept looking up to regardless. All doing pull-ups there is gonna do is put scrapes on your knees, so take a seat and use it as a bench. Mission Unthinkable is a story about being better. It's about being better than your idols, being better than the rules that keep you from doing the right thing, being better than the poisoned image others have of people wearing your badge, and helping others learn those lessons too. Of course, the chapter about police officers is going to have some moral lessons and a bit of pro-authority propaganda spread around. That's mandatory. But it doesn't glorify them, and as far as cop stories go, this one's pretty cookie-cutter. No surprises as far as the eye can see. We know our heroes are going to do the right thing. We know Zhu Yuan's going to rise above Bringer's image, we know Phaethon's going to help them out somewhere along the way, and the good guys are going to come out on top. But predictable isn't bad. Police officers should be predictable. In the case of Mission Unthinkable, predictable is honest, genuine, and reliable. It's easy to come into the chapter and easy to consume it. It's a nice and approachable story I can count on to satisfy and entertain me, and it's in large part to the officers who play the stars of the show. In pursuing a good message and portraying good in general, it's a pretty common pitfall to forsake the characters, or at least one of them, to the end of sending your message and preserving the image of an infallible force of good. But these two and the law they serve are all three pretty fallible. It makes these two beams of hope make us and Phaethon feel that despite the world treating them like criminals, there's hope for things to be set right if the hammer of the law is inherited by good officers like them instead of being wielded by the forces putting people like them in constant risk, even if they want to use their talents for good. And more importantly, they show us that good is a gradient. That you can do good by following the books or by following your heart, and that so long as good is your goal and good winds up being the result, you've done the right thing and can take pride in the work you've done. You brought food. I did. Thought you all would get hungry out here. We don't. But I'll eat. So what brings you out here? And alone at that. Just giving the other two a bit of room. It's just to help them spread their wings a bit, you know? It'll be good for them. You do know that I can tell that you're lying, right? Yeah, considering I could tell you weren't lying just now. Do you really think they can do a whole production by themselves? Sure I do. But they're not doing a whole production today, are they? Do whatever it is you're doing yourself. I need someone who knows the ins and outs of evil. And your first choice was me. What's it going to say about me if my first appearance is as the ambassador of evil? Oh, don't say it like that. I quite literally don't have a choice. We're the same person, so any insight I could give, you surely have tucked away in some part of your brain. You can come scout us whenever you want, so next time, come back with a better pitch. Okay, but I'm not pitching to anybody but you. My point is that I don't want to work with an evil bastard, but I need someone who knows the goods of a bit of evil if I'm going to make this the best that I can. Then show me it's worth my time. Mission Unthinkable is a really efficient chapter. It presents its characters, develops its conflicts, pours out its sauce, delivers the meal, and hands you the check, but it's still only half the picture. The story of the bad things at the crossroads of ego and laws isn't finished. Through Bringer, we watched what happens when someone's ego is informed by a desire to use laws as a ladder, but we still have to see what happens when someone builds laws up for nothing but the sake of their own ego. Public security is split up into pairs, the lawful and chaotic duo of Zhu Yuan and Qingyi, and the stars of Undercover R&B. And let me say, this might be my favorite chapter of the story so far. Only kinda for those reasons. What's not to like? It's tight, small scale, intimate, full of charm, and spends plenty of time developing the antagonist and the relationship Jane Doe has with them as we inch closer towards the crescendo. It's entertaining and interesting, so I don't see much more we could want from it. Not much, except maybe giving Seth a bit more love. As it stands, this really is a chapter almost entirely about Jane, and her being sandwiched between two self-righteous dumbasses while pursuing her own brand of good by rummaging around with evil. This capital W-O woman spends the whole of the special chapter contending physically and socially with one, and having to contend ideologically with the Catboy equivalent of a brick wall. Seth is stupid. Lee righteous. He is a white knight through and through, all the way down to the paladin-esque sword and shield. He is a champion of good, doing the right thing regardless of the cost and doing it as directly as possible. You only ever get to make a single first impression, so let's talk about the one Seth makes. Feel free, because I can't stand types like him. He's a walking trope without a single dash of nuance. That's pretty reductive, but not completely unfounded, especially since our only exposure to him is through the special episode. Let me set the stage. Our lovely, capable, widely respected Captain Zhu Yuan is debriefing PubSec members about a raid they're preparing for. It's precise and meticulously planned. The targets are elusive and causing PubSec grief, so the best way they found to bring them to their knees is by arresting members of their leadership. It's a good strategy. Knock out the right pillar and the ceiling comes crumbling down, especially if these lions are as cowardly as the officers insist they are. But, outspoken himbo that he is, Seth raises his hand ready to interject, and interject he does. It's a little thing to focus on, but it's an objection of authority and experience, and notably, it's experience we as players have been taught to trust and count on. I know I was appalled when Seth started sassing Zhu Yuan, and ignorance just seeps off of his words. He's so incredibly hard to bear. The mountain lions are essentially just a bunch of bandits, diminish and deglorify the evildoers, and there's no way they can outgun the righteous hand of the law that is public security. We should just launch a full-scale assault and take down their entire headquarters in one go. Did I already mention how stupid he is? He's, a bit deluded, but that's normal for someone I'd affectionately call a good always prevails type. Billy's one of those characters too. But Billy's good will always prevail as a front. It's catering to emotions and morale. It's pathos to convince himself to always be an upstanding, moral, and virtuous person in the light of his favorite superheroes. Seth is just thumb-sitting. It does take a certain level of hypocrisy to try and sneak Jane with a maneuver as tricky as this just to shame her for dodging around him. And I feel like calling Jane specifically some kind of rat shows some racial insensitivity. Oh, shut up. But despite being a D1 gaslighter, among some other issues, Seth is heroic at the end of the day. He does have good values, even if he could use a bit more RAM when making decisions or running his mouth. And even if he happens to play the same record on loop. Every chance he gets is one Seth uses to put shame onto the villains. And no one's really gonna bat an eye at that. But hurling insults around like you're on a playground is a bit immature. When Jane confesses to using muscle relaxants on him, Seth uses it as an opportunity to try and make her feel even worse about herself. No wonder I feel so weak. I can't believe you'd sink so low as to use prohibited substances on innocent civilians. The surprise in his voice is something you find yourself counting on whenever he opens his mouth, and the inflection says, "Wow, I knew you guys were evil." but not this evil. You should feel ashamed of yourselves, and that song grates on my ears, even if it is a form of characterization. He's a white knight, a textbook paladin. He's dauntless, forward, ignorant, and stubborn, and that commitment to never use underhanded tactics means he sticks to the same strategies in conversation, too. It is a bit ironic that Mr. Fair and Square takes his turn at manipulating people about as much as Jane does. In a funny way, of course. At face value, most would think you're just another thug, but I can tell you're much more than that. I know you still have some virtues. Let's assume that you do, because I believe that you do. It's like he's reading a script. He might as well have idealism stamped onto his forehead, but he's good without a doubt. Even through the stints of naivety and gaslighting, he insists on taking on any punishment that could be put onto the hostages. He's sure to let the other hostages escape before him when the opportunity to get away is staring them in the faces, and even if he's handcuffed, he's willing to hip-check Razor and pop off about honesty in an ultimately kinda pointless attempt to get Jane to turn over a new leaf, but he doesn't know that it's pointless. As far as character complexity goes, Seth is a list of bullets. He wants to do good, doesn't like bad guys, gaslights anyone he gets the opportunity to, and is very naive. His idealistic outlook makes him a good enforcer, but a pretty bad officer. Seth doesn't have the wisdom to take a step back and evaluate things with the nuance Chingy does, or the intelligence, experience, and commitment to the law that makes Zhu Yuan the phenomenal police officer that she is. He is a sword and a shield, protecting the innocent and striking the evils of New Eridu down in the name of simply doing the right thing. Law and chaos are methods, good and evil are motivations. To Seth, that's as true as can be, and as long as he's allowed to do the right thing, he'll put anything of his own at risk. And that is a loaded gun of qualities most cop stories like having on hand to shoot off indiscriminately. The White Knight is usually blinded by the shine of their own armor, but Seth knows exactly what he's a champion of and when something needs the intervention of a knight like him. He's just simple and stupid. Good is pretty simple too. It's objective at least 9 out of 10 times. The champion of good should match that, and the rowdy cat does. It's not very fitting for someone so committed to doing the right thing to be bogged down with inner turmoil and schemes, especially if the conflict doesn't ask him to pick a greater of two goods like most stories with a character like him would for drama. Zhu Yuan wears Pub Sec's logo framed and centered on her chest as a proud emissary of the law, but Seth's reads less like a sign and more like a sash. Mr. New Eridu, the esteemed champion of all that's good. I'm reading too far into this. Where Zhu Yuan and Qing Yi are models to present two sides of the same coin, how books and the heart impact one's ability to resolve and do the right thing, Seth is a face on a coin of understanding. I understand good inside and out, and I use that understanding to do good wherever I can. Seth's problem is that he doesn't acknowledge the other side, or even the edge of the coin he's on. Good can only be done the good way, with honesty, virtues, and spear-tipped gusto. And on the opposite side is the one who knows the coin inside and out. The heroine who understands evil better than the villains themselves and uses it to do good in her own underhanded way. That other face is named Jane Doe. Of course, that isn't her real name. I doubt that's even her real face, so to speak. Jane Doe is a legal term. It's just used to refer to an anonymous female party, a person of interest with a sensitive identity. But it's the name she chose for herself because anonymity is who she is. She isn't an officer, she's a consultant, outside but affiliated help. And to the end of bringing down the mountain lions and our consumption of the story, she's the main character. Jane is a criminal behavior specialist who specializes in undercover work, and the only people on the force who know the truth about who she is are the ones that need to. Not Qing Yi, not NPCs following their orders, not us, but we have basic deductive skills and can piece it together before the reveal, and certainly not Seth. Let's talk about first impressions again. We get two from Jane Doe the Mountain Lion and Jane Doe the Undercover Agent. Both of these characters are ones that need to be established before the gears even start turning. And when we really meet her is after the racially charged rat comment. It wasn't racially charged. Aw, that's a shame. Cheap tricks are my specialty. Paints a pretty good picture of who she is outside of context, especially as she's cooking a smoke bomb. But her let's just run the mountain lions over is, these hostages are only going to slow us down. Now, I knew who Jane was before playing the chapter because the internet runneth over, and look at her. She's a playable character, and with how generally helpful ZZZ's story is, it's safe to assume she's also one of the good guys. Otherwise, she'd be an outlier. But regardless, we get context almost right after this scene to set up our time playing as her, so we can absorb this scene through a lens of context. It's double duty, efficient wording. Speeding up their escape is convenient to the lions, and not taking hostages is convenient to the officers. That's not what happens, because a certain righteous cat himbo barges in and makes himself a hostage that's too good to let slip away, but the seeds were there for things to turn out exactly as Miss Jane wanted them to. Seth is a headstrong, inexperienced, narrow-minded ditz who's so blinded by thoughts of doing right that he doesn't think about if he should do something at all before doing it. But Jane is meticulous, always with a plan and crossing her T's, and Seth, to her, is a variable. Variables make schemers like her uneasy, and the only remedy is answers. He's new to the Force, but how new? He's stupid, but surely he knows the basics. Is he actually a hostage, or is he a decoy? Does he know who I am? If he does, I need to find out. She injects Seth with muscle relaxants. That keeps him pretty easy to handle while her plan is still being set up. And if she winds up needing him, it's a pretty simple handicap to fix. She says so herself later on, and when Seth starts talking about the straight and narrow, she seizes the opportunity. Oh? You sound like you must know me pretty well. Which he, doesn't. Then he's baggage. Seth is completely out of his depth. He doesn't know who she is, he can't help her, himself, or the hostages in any way, so she's gotta scare him into staying put and get back to work. That work is investigative, and it's social. It's charming backs and forwards with the people whose trust she's gained on the job, and those she still has to earn trust from. It's her use of that special strand of command that she has to weasel out the things that she wants. It's very casual. It makes her seem approachable and respectable to even the big brutes who don't pay anyone's opinions mind. And there's a pretty pushed reading of this where they're only so chummy and cooperative because she's a beautiful woman and, yeah, but that to me seems more like icing for them than the cake. Most of her strength is charisma, and a lot of that comes off as feminine wiles, but the only person in the chapter who directly compliments her appearance is the gang liaison. And rightfully so, but the doorman is a victim of her playfulness, the gangster in charge of supplies is a victim of her sweetness, and Belle is a victim of what she herself can only call riz. Maybe that's not the word I'd use, but it's hard to deny that it has some merit. Rats are shrewd by nature, and thyrans have a tendency to capture a certain essence of the animal they're themed after. I'll be completely transparent. He was going to say that he could die happy if he got to watch Jane cutely nibble an energy bar down. Shrewdness is always finding yourself out of harm's way, and in Jane's case, she does it by getting on people's good sides. But at the end of the day, all of her relationships with the lions are tools on a belt, ammunition, and little do the lions know she's a traitor. Every bit of knowledge she shares, every favor she runs, every bit of praise that leaves the lips of the grunts is a flick of a spinner moving her piece along the board, and Jane's a high roller. Her face is convincing, for sure, but even if it's just a face she puts up, even if she's just an agent of good who uses her understanding of evil to put up that front so she can uproot actual evil from within, she still dropped a man off the side of a skyscraper just to get a few spaces closer to... yeah, let's play it safe. Whatever the winning space in this metaphorical board game is called. It's a miracle that even after that, Seth was willing to come to her aid with Razor. You'd think there'd be more of a conflict there, or that he'd bring it up at all during their escape, but he doesn't. All Seth has for her is telling her to start over and ensuring Zhu Yuan in their call that she deserves a second chance. He also gets to be the butt of one of Jane's jokes, but that's not the point. And that's also the most the people from her own team get from her. Qingyi only acknowledges her existence, and Zhu Yuan really only confirms details with us. Her relationship with PubSec is similarly as loose as her relationship with the Mountain Lions. Honestly, it feels even more loose. She actually chats with and looks out for the Mountain Lion mooks, but the only care she really shows Seth is bullying him in a roundabout way to get his strength back to him at a good time for her, and making him the butt of her jokes. But while Seth is driven to the plot by his desire to do good, Jane is brought in out of necessity. Without her, the plan to take down the Mountain Lions from the inside doesn't happen. She never makes the acquaintances of all of the goons, she never has to bail Seth out, and she never has to grapple with the choice of dropping someone to their potential doom or giving up on her mission. But between you and me, she didn't think about dropping him for very long. Because she's a rat. She planned that out a few steps ago. The operation isn't just about overcoming evil, it's about survival. It's why she had the confidence to take the risk of dropping him at all. That was a place where random fissures opened up a lot, and the guy she had by the scruff of his neck knew his way around the hollow better than anyone else. She took a gamble by dropping him and securing face. And because ZZZ is overall a hopeful story, naturally that hunch pays off and the guy turns out fine. She gets to save face. Not only that, she gets to lift herself up and shine a spotlight on herself. She spins the wheel and takes some spaces. It's a spotlight she shares with the Mountain Lions to boost morale and to make herself look good by getting her underlings into a fever of confidence. Nobody wants to be seen as a coward, and as far as boldness goes, she and Seth are, again, two sides of the same coin. The things she does for Razor's men would have other leaders and figureheads rolling out a red carpet of promotion for her. But because the central antagonist is Razor and not anyone else, Jane's charisma shovels up a hole instead of making a mountain for her to stand on. Undercover R&B is a story about how bad it is when laws are built on the foundation of ego. It's a story best played out by a capable heroine who blows everything and everyone out of the ballpark except for the one she's trying to impress, because despite how well she follows, enforces, and plays the rules, she follows them wrong. It's a story for her and a strong-headed Watson who doesn't and has no reason to give a shit about them in the first place. It's about the trap that the law can be to people under the wrong one, and as a message for a cop story, that's a compelling one. Razor is the law, and a hammer that almost comes crashing down on a few undeserving people. There's also a running theme of turning a new leaf throughout, one that reaches a peak as Jane lets Homeboy plummet a few stories down. This is Jane the Mountain Lion's point of no return, and for the grunt on the chopping block, it's Jane the investigator cutting his line. It's our assurance that Jane agrees with the method Seth so loves to preach, and it's a message that her gauntlet run against all of the grunts we'd gotten to know through the part suggests extends to all of them too. It's very playful. As playful as damage dumping NPCs until they're a pile of scattering particles can be, but it's playful. It's a hazing between peers, and it's a playfulness that persists throughout her interactions with them from the very start of their final backs and forths, and one that isn't humored in Razor's presence or allowed in the presence of his bodyguard. I think it's a shame that after Razor gets his ass beat that the Mountain Lions didn't choose to disband on their own. Maybe they overheard Razor's rant about how he's the only law, and to him all of his followers are fodder and bodyguards to preserve his apparent greatness, and Jane stops Seth from dropping all of them and sends them on their way before PubSec shows up. We're here to talk about stories, not workshop them. But it'd have been nice to see the only charismatic raiders we're likely ever going to meet follow through and turn around for the better. Because I love these guys. I care about the guy who keeps touching his hurt wrist, or the coward who Jane always suckers into letting her slip out of the hideout, and I think it's a waste for the loudmouthed muscle man to talk about being a better example for the others and having what should be his coronation as the new leader be subbed out with having a daddy complex shoved onto him in the 12th hour of the chapter. Jane is an amazing foil to all these whack jobs, and her treating them well makes us give them the time of day. And frankly, if they can entertain me enough to actually squeeze genuine laughter out of me, I'm invested in them all the way through. But they're just a bunch of grunts after Razor gets taken out. They're pathetic, and all their personality vanishes. They're laughingstock. We're given no reason to believe any of them actually would want to avenge Razor, especially when the person they're taking revenge on is someone who treated them as well as Jane did. But that's what we get! We get told that despite his rules only stemming from Razor's ego, his influence was firm enough to keep people loyal to him, and not only do I really not like that being their conclusion, that's not the message you want to tell your audience. You want rules like that to be so flimsy that even the no-name grunts wind up not caring once the pillar crumbles. I know what I said about not workshopping stories, but this is important. It's important because the Paladin operates squarely off of his morals, and the Rat operates outside of the rule she's aligned with in order to get the best result. One has a code that gives his good a tailwind, and the other has a code that makes sure that even if they do evil, they're still pursuing an end that isn't and never losing sight of it. Their codes are informed with our own ideals and egos, but they're their own. They're true to those codes, and they only slightly matter to others who aren't them. But Razor's is entirely selfish and serves no purpose but inflating his own importance and keeping others down. Those working under unjust conditions deserve a chance to turn things around and do right, but those who enforce those conditions in the first place don't. Undercover R&B is a story about second chances and rules, but it's also another demonstration of the gradient of doing good. Zhu Yuan is lawful and good. Qingyi is chaotic and good. Seth is good, and Jane is evil and good. God, I sound like Moo. If the audience was paying attention, they understand. Public security in their chapters are lessons in how the law and the people practicing it should interact with each other. Officer Bringer is what happens if the law becomes window dressing for the ego, when being a police officer is about the publicity and looking good for higher-ups instead of doing the right thing for the people who need you to play ball. Razor is what happens when the law is entirely formed by ego, and people are forced to follow it regardless. Qingyi is what you get when a practitioner of good sees the law as boundaries for them to operate inside of, and suggestions when the right thing falls outside of them. Zhu Yuan is what you get when a practitioner of good treats the law as a guide to help them do as much good as possible in as objective a way as they can. To help the most people, they have to leave their egos behind, their concern for consequences, and entirely focus on the pursuit of good both within and outside the confines of the law. Seth has a center in idealism, using the law as a means to fuel his own ego and give him an outlet to do good and enforce it in the face of evil. Jane, however, is a realist and prioritizes her mission and the rules of engagement over what she wants herself. The two officers set an example of the kind of people that deserve to enforce the law, and the importance of reliability and approachability to the people the officers serve. The law is a ladder for the righteous, not a pedestal for anyone to prop themselves up on. While the amateur and the outside help hammer in a nail, the right thing will always prevail over the wants of selfish superiors. Morality beats ego. Okay, but hear me out, okay? I think I might be onto something. And I'm saying you weren't. Jane's a rat, sure, and with her assertive personality and the streaks in her hair, you could possibly pin Zhu Yuan as a rooster, but the rest of the Chinese zodiac don't line up. Well, it's not just the two of them, Seth's a tiger. 2 spaces removed from the rat, and 4 removed from the rooster. If it were 1 space further, you might have something with them being in a cross, but then Qingyi would be a horse, and that doesn't make any sense. I could totally fandangle that. But then you're fandangling. Ugh, I'll humor you. So, Jane is the rat, Seth is the tiger. Let's call those certainties and go straight across. That would make Qingyi the monkey. Fuck. And Zhu Yuan the horse. Charismatic, generous, heroic, independent. But we'd need a dog and a dragon to complete the wheel, wouldn't we? Not necessarily. The rat is quick-witted, resourceful, and kind, jackpot. The tiger is confident, competitive, and unpredictable, jackpot. And the monkey is sharp, smart, curious, You know these horoscopes are made to be easy to project onto, right? That doesn't make them any less valid. That's still a theme or motif for a character to use, and I don't think it's too crazy to think it helped inspire these four. Well, I think you finally lost it. Yeah, I'll put another quarter in the jar once I'm back home then.